Hola y bienvenido a Learn Spanish en SpanishDict.com. Soy Paralee Whitmire y soy tu profesora. Hoy aprenderás el imperfecto del subjuntivo y los sueños y los deseos, como si fuera rica, viajaría por todo el mundo. Esperaba que no lloviera y mucho más. ¡Vámonos! Me encanta hablar de un tema especial cuando viajo, los sueños. Lo que quería hacer si tuviera la oportunidad. Bueno, esto es un tema un poco complicado y por eso voy a explicarlo en inglés por la mayoría de esta lección. So, you already know how to use the subjunctive, so you don't need to learn any new rules for when to use the imperfect subjunctive over the imperfect indicative. The rules for imperfect subjunctive are the same as for the present subjunctive. Just use weirdo. Wishes, emotions, impersonal expressions, recommendations, doubts, and ojalá. The only difference between the present subjunctive that you already know and the imperfect subjunctive is time. The present subjunctive is in the present, and the imperfect subjunctive, sometimes called the past subjunctive, is for the past. You got it. So when the weirdo clause or the independent clause is in the preterite or the imperfect, or it refers to a previous experience, you will use the imperfect subjunctive instead of the present subjunctive. You can also use the imperfect subjunctive to hope for outlandish things to happen, but we'll go over what they all mean in a minute. Why don't we take a look at a few examples, and I know you'll get the idea. Also, keep an eye out for those endings, okay? Si fuera reina, viajaría por todo el mundo. If I were queen, I would travel around the whole world. Quería que vinieras a mi fiesta. I wanted you to come to my party. Ojalá que nevara en Costa Rica mañana. I hope it snows in Costa Rica tomorrow. Pasearíamos al perro más seguido si tuviéramos más tiempo. We would walk the dog more often if we had more time. Esperaba que se casarais. I had hoped you would get married. Ojalá que los extraterrestres me llamaran. I wish the aliens would call me. The imperfect or past subjunctive can be used in several ways, as you could see in the previous examples. But let's take a look at those endings first. Now, forming the imperfect subjunctive takes a few steps when you're first learning. But once you get into practice, you won't even have to think about it. For now, you need to remember all of the preterite conjugations. Why? Because the imperfect subjunctive stem comes from the third-person plural form of the preterite. Let's look at the verbs I used in the examples in their infinitive forms first. Ser, venir, nevar, tener, casarse, y llamar. Now, do you remember all of their preterite forms? Let's start with a regular verb, nevar. What is the third-person plural form of the verb nevar in the preterite? Nevaron. Good. Now, what about casarse? Se casaron. Muy bien. And llamar? Llamaron. Perfecto. Ahora los irregulares. Ser. Fueron. Muy bien. Y venir. Vinieron. That one is just a stem changer. Y finalmente, tener. Tuvieron. ¡Qué bien! All right, you have all your third-person preterite forms there. Now, just remove the R-O-N ending to get the imperfect subjunctive stem. What does that give us for ser? Fue. Y for venir? Vine. para nevar. Neva, para tener. Tuve, bien. Casarse. Se casa. Y finalmente, para llamar. Llama, perfecto. Ahora, all you have to do is add the imperfect subjunctive endings. Para yo, ra. Tú, ras. Él, ella y usted, ra. Nosotros, ramos. Vosotros, rais. Y ellos, ellas y ustedes, ran. And this is for all verbs in the imperfect subjunctive, whether they end in AR, ER, or IR. So that gives us yo fuera, tú vinieras, él, ella, usted, or it, nevara, nosotros, tuviéramos, vosotros, se casarais, and ellos, ellas, ustedes, llamaran. Now, for some good news, there are no irregulars in the imperfect subjunctive. But of course, you need to remember which verbs are irregular in the preterite, because that is the stem you'll be using, right? Now, you may be wondering why I told you to take the R off the preterite ending if you just have to put it back on there. And that's a good question. The reason is that these endings that you just learned, the ra, ras, ra, ramos, rais, y ran, are just one of the possible ending sets for the imperfect subjunctive. And they are the most widely used in Spain, Latin America, and South America. There is another set of endings, however, that is used more often in the written form in Spain. And those endings are se, ses, se, semos, seis, y sen. Now, we are just going to practice with the first set, since that is the more common one. But it is important to be able to recognize the alternative endings, especially if you are reading a lot of texts that are written in Spain. Bueno, he hablado bastante. Es hora de practicar. Voy a darte unas frases con el infinitivo del verbo que quiero que conjugues en el imperfecto del subjuntivo. Pero no te preocupes. Vamos a hacer uno juntos primero. ¿Listo? Me alegraba de que tú comprar un regalo para mi cumpleaños. So, you see that the independent clause is a weirdo phrase, an emotion, which means that the dependent clause must be in the subjunctive. And it is also in the past tense, which means that you will need to use the imperfect subjunctive instead of the present subjunctive. So, what is the first step in conjugating comprar? We have to find the stem, right? So, what is the third person plural preterite form of comprar? Compraron. Bien. Now, just take off the R-O-N, and there's the imperfect subjunctive stem. So, all you have to do now is add the tu ending of the imperfect subjunctive. Do you remember? R-A-S. So what is the imperfect subjunctive tu form for comprar? Compraras. Perfecto. Ahora lee la frase en voz alta. Me alegraba de que me compraras un regalo para mi cumpleaños. I was happy that you bought me a gift for my birthday. ¡Qué fácil!, ¿no? Ahora te toca. Si ella vivir en una hacienda, tendría un cerdo. Viviera. Si viviera en una hacienda, tendría un cerdo. If she lived on a farm, she would own a pig. Queríamos que nuestros hijos recibir la mansión. Recibieran. Queríamos que nuestros hijos recibieran la mansión. We wanted our children to get the mansion. Si yo tener un ciclomotor, nunca manejaría mi coche. Si tuviera un ciclomotor, nunca manejaría mi coche. If I had a moped, I would never drive my car. Ojalá que nosotros poder volar como pájaros. Pudiéramos. Ojalá que pudiéramos volar como pájaros. I wish we could fly like birds. Enseñarían inglés en Corea si ellos hablar coreano. Hablaran. Enseñarían inglés en Corea si hablaran coreano. They would teach English in Korea if they spoke Korean. All right, I know that you will probably need a lot more practice than just that. But I have a few more things I need to tell you, and you know there is always extra practice for all the verb tenses at SpanishDict.com/reference in the verb section. So let's get into some more detail about when you are going to be using the imperfect subjunctive. In general, you will use the imperfect subjunctive to speak about a hypothetical past, something that didn't happen but could have happened. This falls into the category that is most obvious. If the independent weirdo phrase is in the past, or if the independent clause refers to something that happened in the past, then the subjunctive will also be in the past. Por ejemplo, agradezco que hicieras una tarta de queso. I am glad that you made a cheesecake. Quería que comprara unos hippocampos para mi acuario. I wanted him to buy me some seahorses for my aquarium. You can also use the imperfect subjunctive, as you have seen in several examples, using an if clause. If this, then this. The verb following if will be in the imperfect subjunctive, and the following phrase will use the conditional, which you should remember from our previous lesson. Si tuviera $1,000,000, compraría una casa en la playa. If I had $1 million, I would buy a house on the beach. Haría una película si tuviera una cámara de video. I would make a movie if I had a camera. As you can see, the if phrase or the imperfect subjunctive phrase can start the sentence or come after the conditional phrase, depending on what the focus of the sentence is. Another instance in which you can use the imperfect subjunctive is in making polite requests. You may recognize this from the lesson on ordering in a restaurant. Quisiera las alcachofas con gambas. I would like the artichokes with shrimp. ¿Pudiera mostrármelo en el mapa? Could you possibly show me on the map? And last, there is the hope that something outrageous and most likely impossible may happen. This is preceded by ojalá in most cases. Ojalá que ganara $1,000,000 mañana. I hope that I win $1 million tomorrow. Ojalá que cerdos volaron. I wish pigs could fly. Bueno, es todo para el imperfecto del subjuntivo. Yo sé que es un poco difícil y muy diferente que los otros tensos, pero estoy segura de que puedas usar el imperfecto del subjuntivo en conversación normal muy pronto. Pero hasta entonces, puedes practicar lo que aprendiste en esta lección en SpanishDict.com/aprender, donde hay flashcards con fotos, pruebas, el foro y el video chat. Y si quieres repasar esta lección en marcha, descarga el video podcast de iTunes. Como siempre, todo aquí en SpanishDict.com es completamente gratis. Hasta pronto y nos vemos.